Welcome to Energy Unplugged, the go-to podcast focusing on the global energy transition. My name is Dilara Caglayan, and I'm a lead expert at Aurora, overseeing our research activities on hydrogen. In today's episode, we are delving into the dynamic world of hydrogen, which has still been a very nascent market and the area of my expertise, and we will explore the changes, challenges, and a future outlook of the hydrogen landscape. I'm absolutely thrilled to have a very special guest with us, Dr. Sopna Sury, the Chief Operating Officer of Hydrogen at RWE Generation. Sopna brings a wealth of experience to the table, having held key positions such as Director of Strategy and Regulatory Affairs at RWE Renewables, COO of Energy Services and Infrastructure at Uniper, and various leadership roles at E.ON, including Director of Energy Solutions and Director of Business Development and Business Affairs. With a background that includes managerial roles at McKinsey and a doctorate from University of Witten, Sopna's career has been marked by a commitment to advancing the energy sector, coupled with a solid foundation on economics. Sopna, a very warm welcome to our podcast, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Dilara. Great to be here.
If it isn't your first time with us, you'll likely remember our podcast featuring Sopna around 2.5 years ago. To make your life easier, I'm going to give you the details of the episode. It is our 59th Energy Unplugged episode, where my colleague Hans Koenig hosted the podcast with Sopna after a few months of her assignment to the new role as COO of Hydrogen at RWE Generation. In order to prevent repetition and minimize the overlap, we are going to deep dive into the evolving world of hydrogen, as I mentioned earlier, focusing on the past 2 years. Well, Sopna, first and foremost, although it has been months, congratulations on your role as the chair at Hydrogen Europe. Can you please share with us what this role entails and how it fits together with your current position as COO of Hydrogen at RWE Generation?
In a nutshell, I can tell you I'm representing in my role as chair of Hydrogen Europe more than 440 member companies across the European value chain and additional 30 national associations in Europe, all really focusing on how to advance the hydrogen economy. And the primary objective here really is to shape policy for enabling projects, because this is all about paving the way for a European market here in hydrogen. And from my personal perspective, I truly believe that hydrogen can only become a success if society, politics, industry, and hence associations all together assume joint responsibility. And hence, I would always say it feels like a very, very deep privilege to have this function, because we are still in a very pivotal phase. It's still a very nascent market, and it's all about now getting into a quick ramp up and making the energy transition being a success. So as a chair of the board, that really gives me also the possibility of, I would say, guiding and setting the right strategic parameters.
I couldn't agree more. What a nice role to bring everyone to the same page, because we really need to work together, all of us, to make this happen.
And I think together, Dilara, is just a point, because together we can achieve more. And that's specifically what Hydrogen Europe is about. It's the togetherness, it's the collaboration, it's really creating a platform for the industry to make the market become reality.
Looking back over the past 2 years, I want to first focus on the bigger picture. A lot has happened in the hydrogen space, especially in the last year. I'm not going to spoil people with all the details, but I want to start with your opinion. What is your opinion on the highlights and lowlights during this period? I couldn't help but recall your statement from the previous podcast about the urgency of starting pilot projects. And you said something along the lines of, if we do not start pilot projects now, it might be a little bit too late in future. So it might sound a little bit dramatic, but is there still hope? And have we made enough progress in initiating those pilot projects?
We definitely have made a lot of progress in initiating pilot projects, and 2024 is going to be the year where we really see many of those projects finally reaching completion date and getting into operation. So over the journey of the past 2 years, we've definitely left behind the world of PowerPoint and Excel. And with some of the very exciting funding approvals ahead of all of us here in the industry, this is going to be our pivotal turning point to seeing more and more FITs coming into play. You did ask me a little bit also about highlights and lowlights, Dilara, and let me just state again, one of the major lowlights definitely has been, looking back 2 years, the war in the Ukraine and the still ongoing terrible struggle. I think it's a pain. It's a pain for society. It's a pain for the people living in that country. And it has put a lot of pressure, not only on Europe, but also globally. So looking at hydrogen, this to a certain extent has also put pressure if it comes to value chain, to supply chains, because of the repercussions we've been seeing across technologies, suddenly shortages in certain materials, etc. At the same time, I think it has also given us a little bit of tailwind, unfortunately, at least in continental Europe, because of the realization that natural gas is not going to be the always encompassing and always present cheap gas and fuel to be used, and that there has to be an alternative that feeds not only decarbonization, but is actually also part of a very important security of supply motive, which hydrogen is. And so coming from this motive of security of supply and the highlights I've been seeing, particularly on European level, that is surely that we finally reached a definition on what green hydrogen is supposed to be. Many in the industry will recognize the joint endeavors we had for shaping the RED II Delegated Act. It's good to have a framework because it provides finally planning certainty. Could it have been even more pragmatic? For sure. But again, we need to have at least some playing field to start operating. And second, definitely also the set RFNBO target. So knowing that by 2030, there's a clear target, a commitment to substitute grey hydrogen by green is again creating a lot of tailwind, but also clarity of where the industry needs to go. So if I can now look forward, I would say another highlight for me this year or latest early in 2025 would be if member states now took those RFNBO targets and really implemented and delivered them, translated them into national targets, because then really take every step required for projects to understand what off-takers need, and for off-takers also having the incentives in place to really embrace the hydrogen market.
In the past, we were talking a lot about the production and supply side of the things. Now we started talking about targets and turned our attention to infrastructure and off-takers. And as you highlighted, it's going to be very, very important for off-takers to have developed subsidies, incentives to implement these RFNBOs as well. But it's great to see all those things coming together. I would like to focus a little bit still on the challenges, if you don't mind me asking, because we need to accelerate. And I guess I'm a little bit impatient in that sense. Considering the rapid developments, what do you see as the biggest challenges hindering the market rollout, especially in terms of policy, regulations, and support? Do you anticipate any delays, particularly in the areas of public support, that could impact the industry's trajectory?
2024's reality is that across Europe, this theme about affordability has gained much more importance, rightfully so. And it is everybody's mind. And in addition, we do have now in 2024 elections coming up. So we are looking towards a new European Commission, for instance, a new European Parliament. And this might also induce certain changes, and people who are now looking for votes might be rather inclined to put more focus on the shorter term and hence stress how we can address this challenge about affordability. Whilst when we talk about hydrogen and decarbonization and climate change, those are by the nature of such rather longer term orientated targets. So there is a certain risk that this theme about affordability might just take too much of a role and potentially make the understanding of it's all about a joint investment. We need to invest in our future. We need to invest in the green industry in Europe to still have a platform, might be taking second priority. And this then translates into funding regimes because yes, there are challenges. I mean, that's a matter of fact. We are still a very nascent industry. The value chain within hydrogen is being created as we speak. On the one hand, off-takers are partly still lacking incentives because they need to actually switch from fossil-based production processes to green production processes, which are sometimes, again, CapEx needed. At the same time, they do also face a future world where their OpEx might increase because they can't really rely on cheaper fossil resources, but have to actually shift to greener resources like hydrogen. So there needs to be also a framework in place that really gives them an incentive to saying, yes, we actually now start signing not only MOUs or letter of intents, but we are getting into concrete heads of terms and concrete commercial negotiations to make then an FID possible for a business case. Second, there's also the point about the challenges I feel in the value chain itself. And that's really about the OEMs, the producers, the manufacturers around equipment and kit. The thing is, looking back the past 2 years, there has been a lot of dynamic really taking place positively. I've been seeing so many new players getting onto the scene. So many more companies who actually within their big corporations have created business units who are now focusing on manufacturing electrolysis assets. Many more startups coming into the scene. But those startups particularly, given the current climate, also in the capital markets, they find it sometimes difficult because they still need to actually honor their promises to capital markets. Their stock valuations are very much on their mind. And then if something might get a little bit slowed down because funding for projects is not happening, hence the commitment to the OEM and the suppliers not happening, they might get into a crunch. So from my perspective, this simply calls for, let's be clear, we have got a fantastic technology base in Europe. We just have to now really keep the breath. We have to hold it, to getting across the finish line by making sure we're taking along OEMs capacity. Have the right incentive for off-takers in place, and then we'll also make the green hydrogen world become reality.
I'm going to change the gear a little bit and take a step back from Europe and go a little bit broader in terms of the geography. Last year, when we were talking at our panel at the Spring Forum, Aurora Spring Forum, Inflation Reduction Act was relatively newer, and we were discussing how EU should respond to that. Well, it happened in the past few months, and my question is, speaking of these regions and like zooming outside of Europe, first, Inflation Reduction Act was such a generous support scheme, and everyone has turned their attention into the US once it was announced. And afterwards, Europe came back with a 4.5 euro up to 4.5 euro per kilogram support with its pilot auctions, which is quite generous as well. I would like to hear your thoughts on Europe's response on Inflation Reduction Act and the effectiveness of the support scheme.
See, let's definitely not underestimate Europe's leading role. And yes, you're right. When the Inflation Reduction Act came out, there was a lot of hype around it. I mean, on the one hand, on the other side of the Atlantic, and I think we in Europe very much envied the pragmatism around it, just knowing that in the US, you don't have to send out very lengthy and complex funding applications with hundreds of pages and iterative rounds and long waiting times until you finally potentially get funding approval. But rather the US having a system where with the tax credit, where you have very clarity about the criteria a project has to apply for. But why am I not saying we shouldn't underestimate Europe's leading role here? Because we might not always like the outcome of regulatory standard, but as a matter of fact, if you today look at the US Treasury's guidance, we have basically set the standard. So topics about timely correlation, for instance, have found their way also into how the Inflation Reduction Act is now being detailed. On the other hand, I would say, and this is a little bit maybe sobering up, the hype that has been realized or felt a little bit time ago in the US. But at the same time, what still is true is that it's still fairly problematic. And I think we as Europe, we should have taken this now as a wake-up call, which we, I think, partly did, as you said, with the reference to the hydrogen bank. But even here, there is still a way to go. Yeah, let's look for the outcome of the pilot auction. I'm very pleased that we had 130 submissions. I think that's a very good success also for the Commission to be seen. At the same time, I think there are some rooms to improve to making sure this is a tool that's really fit for purpose. Again, in the very early stages of development, also making sure, looking forward, that maybe the money you're receiving is not at par with how inflation could really develop. Yeah. So there are some elements where we can still get better.
But at least we have started, which is a great thing. We can continue improving the process and progress more and later.
And progress and process, Dilara, is exactly the point. Because at the end of the day, I think we're all agreeing we want to have a competitive solution being in play, because this is about Europe's competitiveness on a global and international scale. And if there is something we can learn, is to really now shape a trade policy that excludes distortions on the one hand, whilst importing a little bit more of the pragmatism the Americans have been actually living. And that's a great opportunity there.
Combining a couple of things you have said, I want to make a statement, which is one of my favorite statements, and I would like to pick your brain on that. Security of supply is a key issue. And to me, once I called hydrogen a democratic fuel, and everyone was nervous about it. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that, because basically, as long as you have electricity wherever you are, you can just produce hydrogen. It's not a natural source where you have to be blessed geographically. I know it's challenging to develop those renewable projects, but it's still possible, one way or the other. But the question comes down to, well, you can develop renewable projects wherever you like, as long as it's like an eligible location. It's possible. But focusing on Europe is a very interesting region in general. And RWE has been very active, especially in the northwestern Europe. So now taking the example of democratic fuel, hydrogen, like the fact that you could produce it anywhere in the world, but narrowing it down to Europe, are there any particular regions where you see more competitive advantages for hydrogen production, specifically in Europe, to make our life easier? Let's focus back to our region. For instance, in the Nordics, with their cheap power prices and high renewables.
Yeah, for sure. As RWE, we've chosen to first of all focus with our endeavors where the proximity to off-takers is good. So the question you are now asking is, great. And I think, as I believe, that's the right way to do, because we are not yet having the really coverage of infrastructure, and it's about really making sure you have quick solutions coming to industry. But your question is now more, okay, where maybe from a longer term perspective are the best production markets in Europe? And for sure, the Nordics do play a very important role for various reasons. One of is actually as a matter of fact regulation again, because the RED to Delegated Act gives certain exemptions for markets with a high renewables penetration, with a very decarbonized grid already. So you can much easier actually acquire the power that you need, and you don't have to go potentially through a PPA rule. So if you talk, for instance, about certain regions in Sweden and certain price zones, Denmark, again, a market very rich of offshore resources and a very constrained grid. So this might anyways naturally become a pairing model to, first of all, take stress off the electricity grid, but also having base load power that is actually also having and producing hydrogen. So the Nordics are surely the attractive ones. And I'm curious how the outcome of the hydrogen bank auction is going to be, but I'm fairly confident we're going to see many applications coming from Sweden and Denmark. But it's not only the Nordics, Dilara, to be very frank. You can also equally look down at the south, southern part of Europe, the Iberian Peninsula. We know how rich the endowments, especially specifically on the sunny side of things are. And that's also a great competitive advantage. So I think it more comes down to at which phase of the market are you looking at and what types of criteria and what is crucial. Eventually, my firm belief is we are going to need any kind of in Europe domestically produced hydrogen, no matter where it comes from. And why? Because it allows us to have a certain independence or degree of independence for security of supply. And second, we need every molecule that comes as imports, which is always going to be much more, like 70 or 80% of our need.
Yes, indeed. Talking about imports and different places where you could produce hydrogen, even within Europe, you have to worry about the overall supply chain and the transportation of hydrogen. So shifting gears to the broader hydrogen value chain, let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure. RWE has been involved across the value chain, including projects like the storage asset in Gronau in Germany. How do you perceive the pace of infrastructure developments? And do you see any potential oversights, particularly in areas like pipeline and storage assets?
Infrastructure is indispensable if you want to make a hydrogen economy really become a success. And infrastructure has got various facets. So if I start with the importing side, infrastructure is also part of ports to making sure we actually get landing infrastructure. It might also encompass potentially crackers to making sure if it lands in shape of derivatives, that we have a chance of really converting it. It encompasses transport pipelines. So that's the grid, where, by the way, I believe Europe has made huge progress. So here the Netherlands was definitely leading when they came up with the European backbone and a clear commitment to gasoline for actually converting and having a clear plan in which regions to start. Germany has been very, very good in putting forward the announced plans for the hydrogen core grid, which is a massive step forward. I mean, just to think, having now a strategic plan, how you're going to convert and only partly build dedicated pipelines for hydrogen so that off-takers know where and when they could rely on volumes to come through, where developers like us understand where could we actually feed in. That is something which I think is the right plan. And there I would always say, think big. Yeah, we can never think too big in order to realize the vision. But yes, it goes further from transport infrastructure also to storage. And yes, there's RWE, we are heavily engaged with the storage project. By the way, we just received with a notification being completed by the European Commission, a very good signal from the IPSA project, where also this storage endeavor is going to benefit from. And here, what we definitely need is a much more holistic storage strategy. Because if I step into the off-takers, the customer shoes, many of them are looking for structured products. So they need to have a product which is not only volatile produced with the renewable sunshine or the renewables wind blowing, but a product that really gives them base load quality. And for that one, you need storage to really do it and make it happen in the long term. Once the monthly balancing actually goes out. So that is hence a very important point. And this is where in Northwestern Europe, particularly, because you need to have the natural caverns, the salt caverns that you can really use, together with Germany and the Netherlands, that is going to be a very important nucleus and platform.
I wouldn't agree more. And every single time when I have the opportunity, I just want to emphasize how much I appreciate the efforts from Germany and also the Netherlands in terms of how much they value the overall infrastructure rather than focusing only on the supply part and saying, we just want to make it cheaper. We don't care how we're going to transport it afterwards. So I really appreciate the efforts, although it might be a very, very big step with the core network, we're talking about massive capacities of transportation. It's still great to see that happening in Germany.
And those roughly 11,000 kilometers, I mean, this is still a starting point. Yeah. And it's about infrastructure per se has to have a view into the future. Infrastructure per se has to think strategically. And this is something where investment comes into play. Again, linking back to investing into the future. And thanks for actually appreciating the efforts the Netherlands and Germany has been making. Let me also add that, for instance, the UK with Project Union is also on a very, very good path. But there, I think you see how the dynamics in the different markets are playing out. There is not one way of handling it, but the common denominator is infrastructure is key.
And it's a great pleasure seeing all these developments happening in different regions and the emphasis on the infrastructure. All right, then. So as a wrap up of our conversation, Sopna, looking at the current state of the hydrogen industry, it's clear that we have made a lot of progress in the past years, especially the past year. I would like to ask you what else you believe is needed for a successful market ramp up, and any additional insights or developments that you think are crucial for the future success of the hydrogen market.
We are definitely still in a phase where a holistic view on projects is going to be. So making sure that every project really lines up with a clear commercial off-taker view, has the understanding of how to link into infrastructure, also ideally enables infrastructure at locations where the production is feasible with grid access, etc. But it's this holistic view because we are far away from a liquid market where you can simply say, I can totally disentangle actually where the production and the consumption is taking place. Second, we talk now quite a bit about infrastructure. And for me, that's a joint obligation. Again, it's about the togetherness here. A network needs to be promoted from both sides, from the producers who want to feed it and from the off-takers. And the way I've been seeing now all the grid operating companies, they're really trying to going ahead. They're really trying the best they can to making sure that they can enable. But again, they need to turn around and still see both producers and off-takers behind them and really help them promote. And one of the examples we as RWE have been leading here together with Open Grid Europe, with OGE, is the Herdecke project. We did it and we do it because we strongly believe that's an ecosystem you're creating. A castle is where you're bringing together all different parties. Thirdly, it's all coming back still to the framework condition. So we talked a little bit about affordability taking now more room in everybody's mind. At the same time, we should not lose our attention and keep the eyes on the ball. And the eyes on the ball is we need to still have ongoing impetus, initial funding support for projects to taking off, because we don't want to stay stuck in pilot projects. Pilot projects are there to learn. What really needs to happen is to convert those learnings into larger scale industrial applications. And yes, we are not commercial yet in terms of business cases. So there is still some kind of financing and pragmatic funding support needed. And if I just see a lot of these things coming together, I am optimistic. I'm also very optimistic when we speak maybe 2 years from now, Dilara, that this year will mark quite a crucial step forward. But it also requires, again, all regulators and all governments not to be complacent. Because sometimes I do hear that there's a lot of pride and they can rightfully take it and what has been put into place. But we are very close to the finishing line. So yes, we still need member states to implement the targets for green hydrogen on the RF and VO side. The sooner, the better. We need to make sure that all the funding schemes, national ones as well as the European ones, are continuously improved and really deliver, including carbon contracts with difference to making actually off-takers also a possibility to really buy in. And there's still a big window for Europe to making sure whatever regulation we put in place to challenge ourselves, whether it couldn't get even more pragmatic. And I would look forward to the revision of the current Renewable Energy Directive, because this is something where Europe together can show we do learn, we listen, and we make it happen.
So in a nutshell, we have made a lot of progress, but there's a lot more to do. And it is full of challenges and a lot of lessons learned waiting ahead of us in the coming years. Well, I'm looking forward to it. And I wouldn't agree more with you, Sopna. Totally agree with every single point you made. Thank you, Sopna, for sharing your valuable insight with us today.
It's been my pleasure, Dilara.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Energy Unplugged.
That was Dilara Caglayan, lead expert at Aurora, overseeing research activities on hydrogen, talking to Dr Sopna Sury, Chief Operating Officer, Hydrogen of RWE Generation. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening and goodbye.